Have you ever wondered how a map drawn by a 16th century admiral could show the edge of a continent no one had yet seen? The ink has faded, but the lines still trace an impossible truth. A coastline free of ice, shaped like the one we now call Antarctica. Beneath its faded script there is a memory older than the paper itself. So before you sink too deep into comfort, take a moment to like this video and subscribe. But only if you truly enjoy what we explore here. And tell me, where are you listening from? And what time is it where you are? The Piri Reis map, drawn in 1513 by an Ottoman admiral, should not exist as it does. Its curves trace the western coast of Africa, the eastern line of South America, and strangely, the northern rim of a land buried under 2 miles of ice. When modern scientists compared those shapes to 20th century seismic data, the match was unsettlingly precise. Yet in Piri Reis's time, Antarctica had not even been discovered. How could the admiral draw what his eyes had never seen? Some say he copied older sources, fragments of forgotten charts handed down from civilizations that once knew the whole world. Piri Reis himself claimed his data came from ancient maps from the time of Alexander. But Alexander never sailed beyond Egypt. Others whisper that his sources predated Greece entirely, that they were relics of an age when the poles lay in different places, when what we call ice might once have been meadow. To understand this riddle, one must remember that ice is not eternal. It drifts, melts, reforms, and the land beneath it, silent and unseen, remembers shapes long erased. In the 1950s, when radar first pierced Antarctica's crust of white, explorers found a mountainous continent with valleys and riverbeds, features too specific to be imagined. The coastline beneath the ice fit the Piri Reis outline almost perfectly. Scientists called it coincidence, or clever guesswork. But coincidence does not usually draw rivers under glaciers. If the map is genuine, its accuracy demands an impossible conclusion. Someone mapped Antarctica before it froze. That would place the original chart thousands of years before recorded civilization, in an epoch when our species was thought to live only in huts and stone circles. It would mean that the shape of our planet was known, and then forgotten, buried not only by ice, but by time and perhaps by design. Consider what that implies. A civilization capable of global navigation, existing long before Sumer, Egypt, or Greece. A culture erased so thoroughly that only a trace remained in a sailor's copied parchment. Could that trace belong to the same world Plato described? Atlantis, the island beyond the pillars, destroyed in a single night of storms. If Atlantis was not a myth of the sea, but of the pole, then its drowning might not have been by water, but by the slow suffocation of snow. Yet every answer collapses into another layer of uncertainty. Scholars have argued that the southern land on Piri Reis's map might simply be a distorted South America, stretched by projection. But the fit is too deliberate, the mountains too exact. Others point to the Orontius Phineas map drawn a century later, showing Antarctica's rivers flowing freely. Were all these cartographers mistaken in the same way, or did they copy something they could not understand? A source older than memory itself? Perhaps that is the deeper question. Not who drew the map, but why such knowledge was allowed to fade. Knowledge once seen does not simply vanish. It is hidden, it is rewritten, it becomes myth. And as the centuries pass, the myth hardens into disbelief. When we look at the Piri Reis map, we're not just seeing an old chart, we're staring into a mirror that reflects our own amnesia. The admiral's parchment is now locked in a museum in Istanbul, sealed behind glass. Its colors have dulled, the ink bruised by time, yet every contour still whispers of a world without ice. A world that should not exist, and yet perhaps once did. If that forgotten world truly breathed beneath the same sky we now see, what remains of it now? Are its ruins resting under 2 miles of frozen silence, waiting for a thaw that will reveal not just stone, but memory itself? Or was the map merely a message, left for us by those who once watched the earth, changed shape and tried to warn us that it would again? Somewhere under that endless white, Rivers still carve paths through darkness, unseen for millions of years. Maybe they flow past mountains that once held cities, temples, or only the ghosts of them. No one knows, no one dares to say. And as the snow falls in endless circles, one question refuses to sleep. If a map can remember what the world has forgotten, then what else might the ice still be hiding? Long before the first ship reached the frozen south, the ice was already alive. It grows, breathes, and drifts in silence, not merely as frozen water, but as the memory of the planet itself. Layers of snowfall, compacted over millions of years, have recorded the heartbeat of Earth, the warmth and the cold, the death of forests, the rise of oceans. Each layer tells a secret, and when scientists pierced the Antarctic sheet to read its story, they found something that should not have been there. A warmth too old, too human. Deep in the East Antarctic plateau, ice cores pulled from 3 kilometers below the surface revealed bubbles of air, trapped since long before civilization began. Within them, traces of carbon, dust, and pollen whispered of a time when the continent was not a grave of frost, but a landscape of rain. The data suggested that Antarctica had been warm enough to support plants, rivers, even forests, not tens of millions of years ago, but in cycles that returned again and again, like the pulse of a sleeping heart. If the ice remembers, then what did it once see? Could there have been an age when the southern pole was green, a world of light before the tilt of the earth condemned it to darkness? It is easy to think of climate as static, as the slow turning of seasons, but the planet moves in ways that human memory cannot follow. Its poles wander, its crust breathes, its oceans rise and fall like lungs. The ice knows this, even if we do not. Some researchers have dared to suggest that a sudden shift, a crustal displacement, as Charles Hapgood once called it, might have wrenched the surface of the Earth, moving continents in a single cataclysmic gesture. Albert Einstein himself once entertained the idea that the weight of the polar ice could unbalance the planet's outer shell, sliding it over its molten core. If such a thing ever happened, then the place we now call Antarctica might once have rested thousands of miles closer to the equator. It would not have been a frozen wasteland, but a lush and living land, a cradle, not a tomb. Imagine what it would mean if that theory were true. Civilization could rise and fall without leaving a trace, buried not by conquest but by temperature, sealed under miles of shifting crystal. If an ancient people once walked those valleys, their monuments would now lie entombed, pressed into the bedrock beneath the ice. The oldest libraries, the earliest temples, the first echoes of language, all locked in a vault of cold silence. Perhaps the earth itself decided to forget them. Modern science resists such thoughts. To the rational mind, there is comfort in chronology, in the notion that time moves only forward, that progress is a staircase, not a wheel. But beneath the calm surface of accepted history, something unsettles the linear dream. Archaeologists find patterns too advanced, artifacts too old, myths too consistent to dismiss as coincidence. Each clue feels like a breath through the ice, a whisper from before. Satellite imagery has shown vast subglacial mountains, valleys, and river systems beneath East Antarctica, features hidden beneath 2 miles of solid ice. The radar echoes draw the outlines of a continent once alive, carved by liquid water. The Gumbertsev Mountains, for instance, stretch across a distance equal to the Alps, a complete unexplained range buried in silence. No one knows how such structures could have formed beneath a cap so old. Perhaps they predate the ice entirely, remnants of a world that never had the chance to be remembered. And then there are the faint magnetic anomalies, fields that twist and flicker beneath the surface, as though shaped by more than stone. Some scientists attribute them to variations in iron deposits. Others notice that the patterns align in geometric regularities too deliberate to be chance. Could these distortions mark the ruins of something vast, not natural, but constructed. No one will say so aloud, yet the question lingers. When we look at Antarctica, we do not just see cold, we see amnesia made visible. Every layer of snow that falls is another veil drawn over the face of time. Yet the deeper we drill, the older the truth becomes, until it ceases to be history and becomes myth once more. The boundary between science and memory blurs, just as the boundary between land and ice dissolves. There is another mystery. Beneath the Ross ice shelf, sensors have recorded echoes of liquid water moving beneath the frozen crust, not in isolated pools but in channels, rivers running through darkness hidden from the sun for perhaps 1,000,000 years. What do those rivers touch? Stone, sediment, or the remnants of something we cannot yet name? In the 1990s, drilling near Lake Vostok revealed microorganisms preserved in subglacial lakes that had never seen the surface. They were alive, alien in a way, yet native to Earth. If life can endure there, in a world without light or air, then what else might survive the cold? Fossilized spores? The bones of a lost species? The relics of hands that once built beneath an open sky? The questions pile like snow, each one burying the last, and through it all, the ice watches. It listens to the shifting of the planet, the hum of our machines, the distant murmur of the sea. It holds within its frozen chambers the breath of ages, air exhaled by creatures we will never know. It keeps the carbon of ancient fires, the dust of vanished storms. If there were cities beneath it, their signatures are already written there, trapped in chemical codes awaiting translation. Perhaps when the next warm age comes, the ice will release what it has held. The rivers will flow again, washing away eons of silence. Maybe the first stones will emerge, smooth and undecipherable, their builders long erased. And once again, humanity will invent new myths to explain them, because we have never learned how to face the idea that we are not the first to awaken. Every melt reveals, but it also erases. The ancient warmth found in the cores might be returning, a cycle repeating itself as before. And somewhere beneath, the earth dreams of what it used to be. Green, sunlit, and full of voices that the ice has kept secret. If Antarctica was once alive and if memory itself can freeze, then perhaps what we call prehistory is not behind us, but beneath us, sleeping, waiting for the thaw. The ice, after all, remembers everything. The question is, when it begins to speak again, will we be ready to listen? Plato never claimed to be a prophet, yet his words have haunted the world like a riddle whispered through stone. In his dialogues Timaeus and Critias, written around 360 BCE, he described an island empire larger than Libya and Asia combined, lying beyond the pillars of Heracles. It was a civilization of perfect order and terrifying pride. And in a single night, he said, it vanished beneath the sea. To most readers, Atlantis is only a parable, a moral lesson about the decay of virtue. But what if Plato was not inventing, but remembering? Scholars have debated for centuries where he found his tale. He claimed it came from the Egyptian priests of Sais, who told the story to Solon, the Athenian lawgiver, 200 years before Plato's birth. They said the story was written in their temple walls, in hieroglyphs no Greek could read. Solon returned to Athens and passed it down through his family line, until Plato turned it into philosophy. But the Egyptians said something more, that the disaster had occurred 9,000 years before their time. 9,000 years. That places Atlantis not in the age of myth, but at the end of the last ice age. It is an impossible coincidence. 9,000 years before Solon, the planet warmed, glaciers collapsed, and sea levels rose more than 100 meters. Entire coastlines drowned, forests moved, species vanished, and something else, something unrecorded, seems to have been lost as well. What if Plato's island that sank was not destroyed by a flood, but buried beneath the cold breath of a new age? If the Earth's crust truly shifted, as Hapgood proposed, then the geography of Plato's world would have looked entirely different. The island beyond the pillars could have been an entire continent, one that later drifted south, crossing the lines of latitude until it froze into oblivion. In that view, the ocean that swallowed Atlantis was not made of water at all but of ice. The descent was not a fall into the sea but into silence. Sounds absurd, yet even in absurdity there is pattern. Plato described Atlantis as a land of concentric circles, alternating rings of land and water, all centered around a shining capital. When scientists mapped the subglacial topography of Antarctica, they found circular basins and raised plateaus, shapes eerily reminiscent of those same patterns. Coincidence, perhaps, but coincidences have a strange persistence when they concern the forgotten. Across the millennia, fragments of the same story echo from culture to culture. The Egyptians spoke of Zep Tepi, the first time, when gods walked among men before the world was remade by flood. The Mesopotamians told of Eridu, the city of beginnings, destroyed and rebuilt after the waters rose. The Greeks remembered an island beyond the horizon that vanished in a single night. And in the Andes, long before the conquistadors, people told of Viracocha, a god who came from the south, across the sea of ice, carrying knowledge of the stars. Why do so many myths look toward the pole? When early explorers reached Antarctica's edge, they did not find gods, only silence. But silence can be deceptive. Beneath that emptiness lies a continent large enough to hold every empire humanity has ever built. If Plato's Atlantis existed there, its ruins would be unreachable, sealed by glaciers thicker than mountains. Only in recent decades has radar and satellite imaging begun to reveal the terrain below. Mountains, valleys, even what appear to be the outlines of ancient river deltas. Some researchers, quietly working outside the margins of orthodox science, have noted geometric regularities within those radar maps. Right angles, symmetrical ridges, and buried pyramidal forms beneath the Queen Maud region. They are cautious, as any rational mind would be, but the shapes remain. If natural, they are strange. If artificial, they are history's deepest burial. Still, Plato's tale was never meant to be read literally. Or was it? He insisted that the story was true, that he had not invented it. He even began Critias with a kind of warning that the tale may seem incredible, but it had been recorded by those who saw with their own eyes. Why would a philosopher, careful in logic and allegory, risk his reputation by calling fiction a fact? Unless perhaps he knew that the truth would survive only as allegory. Consider the time in which he lived, an age already haunted by loss. The Bronze Age collapse had left Greece in ruins, its own history fractured. Plato looked backward and saw fragments of a world that seemed more advanced than his own. The Atlanteans, he said, possessed ships, palaces, and metals unknown to the early Greeks. He called them arrogant, but he also described their mastery of geometry, astronomy, and hydraulics. A civilization capable of global influence and of self-destruction. It is easy to dismiss this as myth, yet our species has always buried truth inside metaphor. Every legend begins as memory, then fades into poetry. Perhaps Plato's Atlantis was the fossil of a memory so old that only story could preserve it. Perhaps he spoke of a real culture, wiped away when the earth shifted its breath and the ice closed over the lost Oi to the south. When modern scholars calculate the dates of the ice expansion, when they map the subglacial mountains, when they find fossilized forests and riverbeds beneath the snow, they all, without realizing it, reading the same story Plato wrote, not in Greek, but in the language of geology. The continents move, the seas rise, and civilizations vanish. Only the earth remembers, and even its memory is slow to thaw. And so the philosopher's warning echoes through time. There have been many destructions of mankind arising out of many causes. The world, he said, has ended many times before and will again. Perhaps that was the real lesson of Atlantis. Not arrogance, but impermanence. Still, a whisper lingers beneath his words. What if he was not warning us about ourselves, but describing something he could not name? Something that survived under another sky, another sun, another axis. Could Atlantis still exist? Not in the sea, but beneath the oldest ice on Earth. The answer is buried deeper than reason can reach. The philosopher's ink has dried, the ice has not. And as we dream of lost cities and vanished maps, one question drifts across the centuries, cold and patient as the pole itself. If Plato was remembering, then who was he remembering for? Beneath the stillness of Antarctica, sound travels differently. It does not echo as in a cavern or ripple like in water. It moves through ice, slow, elongated, dreamlike. When scientists first sent seismic pulses through the frozen crust, they expected the usual reflections of rock and void. Instead, they found shapes, structures, layers that suggested movement long before the freeze. The signals came back fractured, scattered, as though bouncing off something more complex than bedrock. Some of those echoes, they said, came from depths no human instrument had ever mapped before. Hidden under nearly 4 kilometers of ice lies a world within a world. Mountains taller than the Alps, valleys deeper than the Grand Canyon, and vast lakes sealed away for millions of years. Lake Vostok, the largest of them, stretches for more than 250 kilometers beneath the surface. Its waters are liquid, kept warm by pressure and the slow heat of the earth. No sunlight has touched it since before the rise of humanity, yet when a Russian team drilled into it in 2012, they discovered traces of microbial life, something that had survived in total isolation. That life was not alien, but it was ancient, adapted to a place no other ecosystem could endure. If such life can persist in that abyss of cold, what else could remain? When the radar pulses struck the subglacial mountains known as the Gumburtsev Range, the reflections revealed patterns not entirely natural. Ridges aligned in symmetry, sharp angles where erosion should have rounded stone. Geologists called them coincidental geometries, but even coincidence has its limits. Some saw in those lines the faint hint of walls, terraces, or foundations swallowed by time. In the 1970s, as satellite imaging improved, technicians noticed anomalies near Princess Elizabeth Land. Heat signatures, faint but steady, emanating from beneath the ice. They could not be volcanic. There were no vents in that region. The explanation vanished into classified reports. Years later, leaked documents described subglacial radar reflectivity, consistent with artificial cavities. Officially, the data was inconclusive. Unofficially, it was never mentioned again. It is difficult to imagine the scale of what lies below. The Antarctic ice sheet is not uniform. It shifts, flows, and cracks, revealing glimpses of black stone beneath. Beneath those cracks, gravity scans show strange densities, voids that could be natural caves, or something carved. The continent is laced with tunnels of water, some as wide as rivers, flowing unseen toward the sea. If one follows those channels deep enough, what landscapes might open in the darkness? In 2018, NASA's Operation Icebridge mission recorded radar patterns beneath the Wilkes Land region, a massive circular depression nearly 500 kilometers wide. Some geophysicists suggested it was the scar of a meteorite impact, perhaps linked to one of Earth's mass extinctions. Others quietly wondered if the formation might conceal something else, an immense cavity, an under-ice basin, or even remnants of a prehistoric structure now distorted by glacial pressure. The official explanation remained cautious, but the idea of a hidden void persisted. Those who dream of lost civilizations point to these anomalies as whispers of the past. They imagine the lost outpost of a people driven south by flood or fire, retreating to a land that would soon become their tomb. They picture temples encased in crystal, pyramids bent under the weight of ice, inscriptions sealed beneath translucent walls. Most of science laughs at this, but even the laughter has softened over time. For every century that passes, the boundary between myth and geology shifts a little closer. There are stories from the earliest explorers, too. In the 1940s, during Admiral Richard Byrd's Operation High Jump, American pilots reported seeing mountain peaks in circular formation, rising through the clouds like the edges of an ancient citadel. Others claimed to glimpse vast ice-free valleys, strangely symmetrical, before the mist swallowed them again. Official logs record nothing but fog and snowstorms, yet the idea persists that beneath those storms there are echoes of something that once had form. The human mind is tuned to recognize patterns, even where none exist. Perhaps these shapes, the perfect ridges, the circles, the voids, are only the mind's longing for order reflected through ice. But what if the longing is justified? If the continents have truly shifted? If the world once turned on a different axis, then everything we call myth could simply be the memory of another map. The ice itself is not silent. It creaks, hums, and fractures. Sometimes deep-frequency sensors record vibrations that resemble rhythmic pulses, as though something far below is still moving. Geologists attribute them to melting, pressure, or tectonic shifts, yet their cadence is haunting. Too regular, too slow, almost deliberate. One recording taken near Lake Vostok lasted 20 hours, a deep oscillation repeating every few seconds, echoing through layers of ice like a distant heartbeat. In those vibrations lies a kind of voice, not human, but geological. The earth speaks in pressure and resonance, and those who listen hear more than they can explain. When we send sound into the ice, it returns with fragments of its own story, as if the planet is whispering of what it once carried. Perhaps that is what Plato meant when he wrote that Atlantis sank in a single day and night. Not a literal drowning, but as immersion in silence. If any trace of that civilization still exists, it would be in fragments too vast to recognize. A wall mistaken for a ridge, a colonnade for a fault line. The ice would have devoured every texture, smoothing the world into abstraction. What remains beneath is both everywhere and nowhere, like memory after waking. We dig, drill, and map because we cannot accept forgetting. The farther we peer into the ice, the more it feels like looking into the human mind itself. Layers upon layers of compressed experience, each preserving a different era. To melt it is to remember. Yet memory is dangerous. What happens if the ice reveals something we cannot explain within our history? Will we dismiss it, as we have so many times before, or will we finally listen to the echoes? No one knows what the ice hides, only that it is vast enough to hold everything we have ever imagined, and perhaps something more. The signals that return from its depths are never complete. They come back distorted, bending under pressure, carrying the ghost of their own origin. Maybe that is what Atlantis has become, not a city, not a continent, but a sound, a slow vibration moving through time waiting for someone to hear it. And if that sound is still traveling upward through 4 kilometers of frozen sleep, then somewhere, deep beneath our feet, a forgotten world is still calling through the cold. Will we recognize its voice when it finally breaks the surface? No ancient world should have been able to map a continent they could not see. Yet somehow, fragments of those forgotten maps survived, copied, redrawn, and guarded like talismans across empires that rose and fell. The Piri Reis chart was only the beginning. There were others, scattered across the libraries of Europe, the Orontius Phineus map of 1531, the Boachi map of 1739, and Gerard Mercator's mysterious projection that placed an enormous southern land mass where no ship had yet sailed. Each seemed to whisper the same impossible secret, that someone somewhere once knew the true shape of Antarctica before the ice. The Orontius Phineus map is the strangest of all. It shows rivers flowing across what should be a dead continent, mountain chains curling like frozen veins, and a coastline free of ice. The detail is unsettlingly precise. Bays where modern satellites later found subglacial inlets, islands whose outlines matched those beneath the Ross Sea. How could a Renaissance cartographer, drawing from second-hand rumors, trace something that accurate? He claimed his source came from very ancient sea charts, inherited from older times, preserved by sailors long gone. It was as if the memory of a vanished world had passed through ink and parchment, surviving only by chance. Charles Hapgood in the 1950s tried to make sense of this riddle. His theory of Earth's shifting crust proposed that the outer shell of the planet could slide over its molten interior, dragging continents to new latitudes in a single catastrophic motion. If that were true, then what is now Antarctica might once have been closer to the tropics, mapped by a civilization whose instruments were washed away when the poles moved. Einstein himself wrote a letter supporting Hapgood's logic, calling it a possible explanation of many geological puzzles. But the scientific world dismissed it, not because it lacked imagination, but because it lacked proof. The idea of the planet's skin moving like a loose coat unsettled the tidy order of modern geology. Still, the maps exist. They are not theories but objects, drawn by hands we can trace. The Orontius Phineas map was presented to the French king. Mercator's world projection shaped navigation for centuries. If their southern land masses were simply guesswork, why do they align so neatly with the radar outlines beneath the ice? Why do the rivers follow paths that match hidden valleys, carved long before our time? Coincidence bends under the weight of repetition. Mercator himself hinted at something deeper. In a letter from 1577, he described an ancient source known to the scholars of Alexandria, a chart of the world before the last great flood. He believed that remnants of it had survived through Arab geographers, passed into Europe after the fall of Constantinople. The notion suggests a lineage of forbidden cartography, knowledge preserved through dark centuries copied in secret, each generation forgetting a little more of its meaning. If that chain is real, then our maps are not purely inventions of the modern age. They are echoes of a geometry once global. Philippe Boischer's map, drawn 2 centuries later, divided the Antarctic land mass into 2 parts separated by a broad channel, exactly as radar would confirm in the 1950s, revealing east and west Antarctica split by the Transantarctic Mountains. Boischer could not have known this. His map predates any Antarctic exploration. He described his work as a reconstruction based on ancient data. Those words, so calmly written, hold the weight of an unspoken inheritance. Perhaps the most haunting pattern among all these charts is not what they show, but what they omit. Each bears empty zones, regions carefully left blank, as though the cartographers were obeying an older silence. Some coastlines fade mid-stroke. Others stop at invisible borders, like sentences missing their last word. Were those omissions due to ignorance or to reverence? If these mapmakers copied sources older than history, perhaps they also copied their boundaries, the sacred limits of knowledge. We imagine the past as primitive, yet our ancestors navigated by stars we barely notice now. The megalith builders of the Neolithic aligned their stones with solstices and lunar nodes with an accuracy within seconds of arc. The builders of the Great Pyramid oriented it to true north with precision rivaling modern instruments. If they understood geometry so well, could they not have drawn the Earth? If their descendants inherited fragments of such maps, the Renaissance cartographers might merely have traced what was already ancient. But history rarely tolerates anomalies. Institutions thrive on continuity. Lost worlds do not fit well within curricula. When Hapgood presented his findings to academia, they thanked him politely and changed the subject. When explorers found hints of subglacial mountains, they filed the data away. To admit the possibility of forgotten cartographies would mean rewriting the origin story of civilization itself. And so, the maps remain curiosities, framed in museums, admired, but never believed. Yet the human eye cannot unsee. Once you compare the Orontius Phineus coastline to modern topography, something inside refuses to let go. The resemblance is too exact, the angles too deliberate. It feels less like chance and more like a memory resurfacing through ice. Maybe those maps were not made for us but by us, remnants from an earlier cycle of humanity, erased and reborn, carrying faint recollections of our own forgotten past. In every ancient legend, there is mention of the world before the world. Sumerian kings reigned for thousands of years before the flood. Egyptian priests spoke of dynasties ruled by gods before men. These are not isolated fantasies but a chorus of remembrance. If all myths echo one truth, that something great existed before the great forgetting, then perhaps those forbidden cartographies are the only surviving handwriting of that civilization. Each map, each parchment, each line of faded ink becomes a message in a bottle, adrift across centuries. We study them as historians, but maybe we should listen as archaeologists of memory. The ink does not just depict geography, it records the outline of an idea, that the Earth's face was known, mapped, and loved long before we arrived. As you imagine the explorers unrolling those ancient charts by candlelight, think of how the flames must have flickered across lands no longer visible, mountains erased, and seas still frozen in prophecy. Each stroke of the quill was an act of defiance against oblivion. Perhaps that is why the maps were called forbidden, not because they revealed secret lands, but because they reminded us that knowledge is not linear. It rises, collapses, and returns like the tide. The same hand that once drew the world may yet draw it again when the ice retreats. And if those lines, traced across fragile parchment, are the only surviving memory of a vanished civilization, then every coastline we redraw today is an echo of their lost horizon. The next time you look at the map of the world, let your eyes drift south, beyond the edge of what is known, into that pale blank where all stories end. There, under the white silence, the lines are still waiting. Whose hands first drew them? The earth does not stand still. Beneath its calm blue surface, continents slide, tilt, and shiver, drifting on a restless sea of molten stone. To us, it feels unchanging, but the ground is always moving, like a great animal breathing in its sleep. And sometimes, in rare intervals measured in eons, that breath becomes a convulsion. The sky turns, the stars shift, and the very poles of the planet wander toward new horizons. Scientists call it geomagnetic reversal, the slow dance of the Earth's magnetic field, flipping from north to south and back again. The record of those reversals lies written in lava flows and ocean sediments, a geological heartbeat spanning millions of years. But what if the poles shift more than magnetism? What if the crust itself moves, dragging continents into darkness and ice? This is the theory that both fascinated and frightened those who dared to imagine a forgotten world, the magnetic exodus. In Hapgood's hypothesis of crustal displacement, the outer shell of the Earth, the lithosphere, can shift suddenly over the inner layers like a skin sliding over a living body. Such a movement, even of a few thousand miles, would alter climates overnight. A fertile land could become a tundra, an ocean could swallow a city. The poles would not freeze new ice, they would become ice, and those who lived at the wrong latitude would never see another sunrise. When Einstein entertained Hapgood's idea in 1953, he called it not impossible. He warned, however, that the mechanism was uncertain. What force could move the entire crust at once? Hapgood suggested that the weight of the ice caps themselves might unbalance the planet, shifting its skin until the poles found new equilibrium. The change need not be global to be devastating. A few degrees of latitude could doom entire continents. Evidence of sudden climate swings litters the geological record. Around 12,800 years ago, as the last ice age began to end, the world plunged abruptly back into cold. The Younger Dryas, a 1,000-year winter whose cause remains mysterious. The mammoths died, the great herds vanished, and glaciers advanced again. Then, just as suddenly, warmth returned. What happened? A comet impact, some say. A shift in ocean currents, others argue. But a few have whispered that the Earth itself moved. If the poles shifted then, even slightly, the equator would have changed, and with it, every climate zone on the planet. A temperate paradise could have slid into the latitudes of endless night. That date, roughly 12,000 years ago, matches almost perfectly with Plato's timeline for the fall of Atlantis. Coincidence, or the shadow of the same event described through myth? The idea is seductive, that a single planetary tremor erased not only species but civilizations. The mythologies of ancient peoples seem to remember such shifts. The Hopi speak of worlds destroyed by the great turning of the sky. In Norse legend, Ragnarok begins when the earth trembles and the stars fall from their places. The Chinese tell of Gong, the celestial serpent who struck the mountain that held up the heavens, tilting the sky and flooding the world. Across continents, stories converge on one image: the world spinning out of alignment, the axis of life itself displaced. Could these myths be the human echo of a real geological trauma? Perhaps our ancestors saw constellations change, seasons break and night fall where there had once been dawn. Perhaps they watched the sun's path twist across the horizon until their calendars failed. To preserve that terror, they carved it into story, into ritual, into warnings whispered from fire to fire. In the 20th century, scientists studying the ocean floor discovered that the magnetic orientation of minerals alternated like stripes, proof that the poles had indeed reversed many times. Though these reversals took thousands of years, they hinted at the planet's capacity for transformation. Even now, the magnetic north drifts by nearly 40 kilometers each year, sliding toward Siberia. The Earth's field is weakening. No one knows why. If history is cyclical, another displacement may already be underway. Such a shift would not be gentle. Imagine the oceans tearing loose from their basins, tsunamis miles high sweeping across continents. Imagine cities dissolving into dust as the crust grinds against itself, mountain ranges rising overnight. Humanity, so proud of its stability, would vanish into myth again, remembered only in fragments, like those ancient cartographers who somehow mapped a different world. Perhaps they were the survivors of the last turning, the keepers of memory from before the sky changed. In that light, the frozen south becomes more than a landscape. It becomes a monument to motion. If Antarctica once lay farther north, it would have been free of ice, rich with vegetation, possibly home to life far older than any civilization we know. When the crust shifted, it was carried into the polar night, entombing its forests, mountains, and, if the legends are true, its cities. That is the essence of the magnetic exodus, a migration not of people, but of the planet itself. Modern science resists such sudden upheaval. It prefers slow change, gradual erosion, steady movement. Yet nature rarely obeys our expectations. The fossil record shows bursts of extinction, layers of ash and mud marking moments when the Earth reset itself. What we call stability may only be the pause between catastrophes. If such an event happened once, it could happen again. The ice at the poles grows heavier each year, pressing down upon the crust, creating stress lines invisible to us. The magnetic field weakens, the climate shifts. In the language of myth, the world stirs in its sleep. One day, perhaps suddenly, it will turn again. And when it does, what we call history will slide beneath the ice to join the others. The ancients may have known this cycle. Their monuments, the pyramids aligned with stars that no longer rise where they once did, could be warnings, not tombs. They may have mapped the heavens not for worship but for survival, recording the positions of the sky before it shifted. In their myths of floods and frozen lands, they encoded the memory of the magnetic exodus, the day the earth forgot itself. We too might be living at the edge of such a cycle, unaware of the slow tilt beneath our feet. Perhaps that is why the old maps haunt us, because they belong to another orientation of the world, one that the earth has already erased. The compass, that fragile invention, points north only because the planet allows it. But if the poles wander, even slightly, our navigation becomes meaningless. North would no longer be north, up would no longer be up, and the maps we cling to would fold into dreams. When that moment comes, the continents will move again, and the ice will claim new ground. The forgotten will be remembered, and the remembered will vanish. The question is not whether the earth has shifted, but whether we will notice when it does. The coldest place on earth once held forests. That is not metaphor or myth, but fact, buried in stone and frozen time. When the first cores of Antarctic rock were raised from beneath the ice, scientists found impressions of leaves, seeds, and even the veins of ferns pressed into the shale. Fossilized wood, still aromatic when cut open, whispered of a world that no longer fits the imagination. A land of green rivers and sunlight where now only wind exists. In the transantarctic mountains, beneath layers of permafrost, geologists have uncovered petrified forests so intact that growth rings can still be counted. They belong to a species that thrived 260 million years ago. Trees that rose and fell before mammals ever drew breath. Yet it is not their age that disturbs, it is their position. These forests once grew near the South Pole, in regions that should have known only darkness for half the year. Which means, at least for a time, the pole was not as we know it. The planet was warmer, the continents arranged differently, the sky itself perhaps tilted. Farther inland, at Mount Achernar, fossils of freshwater plants appear, suggesting the presence of streams and temperate lakes. Some scientists have even found fossilized pollen, grains so delicate they crumble at touch, proving that flowering plants once thrived in regions that today reach -80 degrees Celsius. The implications stretch beyond geology, they reach into myth. For if Antarctica was once a paradise, then its transformation into ice is a story of fall and exile written in climate. The record shows that warmth has returned more than once. Around 19 million years ago during the Cretaceous, Antarctica was covered in dense rainforests similar to modern New Zealand's. Later, during the Eocene epoch, palm trees grew along its coasts. Fossilized pollen from those palms has been found beneath the Lamba Glacier, under 4 kilometers of ice. How could such fragile life flourish there, unless the continent was once closer to the equator, or the planet itself was warmer than any human has ever known? To understand what these fossils mean, imagine the world shifting not in years, but in breaths of deep time. The continents drift like dreamers in slow migration, carrying with them memories of lost climates. When they reach new positions, the memories freeze, sealed under sedimental snow. The Antarctic fossils are more than remnants, they are time capsules of heat. Each leaf imprint is a portrait of sunlight preserved by darkness. Some researchers, peering through microscopes at the cell structures of those ancient trees, notice something else, traces of rapid extinction. Growth rings stopped abruptly, as though the forest were caught mid-season. Volcanic ash in the same layers suggests a cataclysm, perhaps a sudden cooling, perhaps something stranger. Could the final freeze have come faster than science allows? Could an event, a crustal shift, a cosmic impact, a magnetic reversal, have transformed green valleys into white desert in a single geological heartbeat? When modern satellites scan Antarctica's subsurface, they reveal not just fossils but entire landscapes, riverbeds, deltas, and what appear to be floodplains. Some of these lie under the West Antarctic ice sheet, which itself rests on land hundreds of meters below sea level. If the ice melted, that region would not reveal mountains, but an inland sea. Perhaps once it was that, a shallow ocean fed by rivers flowing from the highlands, a cradle of life before the great freeze. The notion that Antarctica was habitable, even briefly, carries echoes of the oldest myths. The Greeks spoke of Hyperborea, the land beyond the north wind, a paradise where night never fell. The Amdaean legends told of Viracocha's shining kingdom in the far south, swallowed by storms. The Egyptians, in some interpretations of their temple texts, referenced lands where the sun sleeps. Different directions, same idea, a polar realm of forgotten warmth. It may be coincidence, or it may be that the human mind has always sensed asymmetry. One paradise lost to fire, another to ice. In 2017, researchers discovered fossilized roots beneath the ice shelf of Pine Island Bay. The soil itself, preserved beneath the glacier, contained traces of organic carbon, hinting at a forest only 33 million years old. Recent, by Earth standards. That age coincides with the final collapse of Antarctica's temperate climate. Something changed then. Perhaps a drop in atmospheric carbon dioxide, perhaps a realignment of continents that shifted ocean currents. Whatever the cause, the warmth ended, and with it the last living forests of the South. Even today, the ice hides warmth beneath it. Volcanic heat seeps through cracks, feeding subglacial lakes that never freeze. Microbes live in those lakes, sustained by minerals rather than sunlight, evolving in isolation for millions of years. In a sense, life in Antarctica never ended. It adapted, shrinking into invisibility. The ice did not destroy it. It buried it alive. If a civilization ever stood there, as some believe, it would have faced the same fate. The first snow would not have been seen as doom, but as winter. Then years would pass, and the thaw would never return. Temples would crumble, rivers turn to glass, knowledge to silence. Fossils of warmth would become fossils of memory, indistinguishable, except to those who listen. Modern science extracts these fossils carefully, cataloging, naming, classifying. Yet every leaf they find is also a confession that the world changes faster, more violently, and more completely than we care to admit. We are living in a pause between transformations. The ice we see today is not permanent. It is only a temporary skin. Beneath it, the soil still remembers the scent of rain. When the ice cores melt in laboratories, the trapped air whispers of long-lost summers. Tiny bubbles expand and burst, releasing atmospheres older than humanity. Some contain traces of greenhouse gases, others of volcanic ash. Together they tell a cyclical tale: warming, freezing, awakening, forgetting. The Earth does not destroy, it resets. Each age inherits the ghost of the one before. Perhaps the fossils beneath Antarctica are not the remnants of a prehistoric forest, but the footprints of a rhythm, the slow pulse of creation and loss. And perhaps we too are only another season in that rhythm, waiting to be fossilized by the next turn of ice. When we look upon the frozen continent, we see the surface of the present. But the fossils tell another truth, that warmth lies beneath, and that what sleeps may one day rise again when the cold grows thin. If the ice ever retreats, and the forests awaken from their petrified slumber, what else might awaken with them? The ice is melting. Slowly, imperceptibly, yet undeniably, the white continent begins to breathe again. From satellites, the change is delicate. Faint shades of blue where white once reigned, slender cracks spreading like veins across the surface. But beneath that stillness, something vast is shifting. Antarctica is not dying, it is awakening. And with each drop that falls, it reveals fragments of what was once hidden, as though the planet itself is loosening its grip on an ancient secret. The 20th century treated the poles as borders, blank zones on the map, frozen guardians of the known world. But technology has erased their silence. NASA's Operation Icebridge, begun in 2009, sent aircraft laced with radar to scan the unseen ground below. The instruments pierced miles of ice and found what satellites could not. Valleys deeper than the Grand Canyon, mountains rivaling the Alps, and voids so immense that they seem to mock imagination. Some of these voids, researchers admitted, could not be explained by glacial activity alone. The greatest of them lies beneath the Denman Glacier, a canyon more than 3 kilometers deep, the lowest point on land anywhere on Earth. It runs for over 100 kilometers, carved into bedrock long before the ice covered it. No light has touched its floor in tens of millions of years, and yet within its depths, radar found patterns of reflection that flicker strangely, as if bouncing off surfaces smoother than stone. The official reports call them anomalous echoes. The unofficial whispers call them architecture. Elsewhere, in the West Antarctic ice sheet, satellites have detected immense masses shifting beneath the surface, too dense to be rock, too localized to be geological. Some suggest they are magma intrusions, others say mineral deposits. But the shapes, circular, symmetrical, geometric, raise quieter questions. When viewed from above, they resemble the buried outlines of cities drowned in snow. We tell ourselves they are tricks of data, the noise of sensors. Still, the symmetry remains. As the ice thins, it begins to reveal color. Brown ridges appear where glaciers retreat, streaked with iron oxide and dust. What once was sealed becomes landscape again. In 2019, researchers reported a discovery near the Thwaites Glacier. Sediments that spoke of an ancient ecosystem, roots, pollen, and spores from plants that had thrived 90 million years ago. But mixed within the samples were structures they could not categorize. Tiny, regular forms under the microscope. Neither mineral nor organic. They might be crystallizations from pressure, or something far older, fossilized by processes we do not yet understand. The melting reveals, but it also conceals. Every year, the continent loses an estimated 150 billion tons of ice to the ocean, feeding rising seas. Yet the more it melts, the less we can preserve. The evidence dissolves with the mystery. By the time we understand what was buried, it may already have slipped away. The past is bleeding into water, and water carries no memory. There are regions that no one is allowed to visit. The Antarctic Treaty, signed in 1959, forbids military presence and reserves the land for peace and science, but it also restricts access. Only a handful of zones are open to exploration. Others are marked as environmentally protected, yet few have seen them to verify why. Satellite imagery of certain areas shows nothing but blurred whiteness, as though deliberately scrubbed. Those who speculate call these places vaults, archives of the pre-human world. Those who defend the secrecy say the truth is simpler. Contamination must be prevented. Both explanations sound incomplete. Operation High Jump, launched in 1946 by Admiral Richard Byrd, remains a chapter of polar history wrapped in silence. Officially, it was a scientific expedition. Unofficially, it was the largest military operation ever conducted in Antarctica, 13 ships, aircraft, and more than 4,000 men. It lasted only months before being abruptly terminated. Byrd's latest statements, vague and troubled, spoke of flying objects that could move from pole to pole in moments. He was dismissed as pathetic, perhaps unwell. But his diary, if authentic, tells of a land beyond the pole lush and green. No evidence has ever been found, yet the rumor refuses to die. Whether these accounts are truth or metaphor, the fact remains. The ice hides things that do not wish to be found. Geological surveys have revealed vast magnetic anomalies, regions where compasses falter, where instruments misread. One such area lies near the Gamburtsev Mountains, another beneath the Wilkes Land crater. In both cases, readings spikes sharply as though reacting to metal or concentrated magnetic fields buried deep below. Scientists attribute these to natural variations, but the patterns are eerily regular, geometric again, forming near-perfect circles. As the poles warm, these anomalies become more accessible. Research teams drilling for ice cores sometimes report unexpected warmth, as though heat radiates from below. In some cases, the boreholes fill with water that should not exist at such depths. The continent, frozen for eons, is beginning to breathe, and what it exhales is mystery. The melting also reveals ancient microbes, viruses locked in ice for millions of years. In 2020, scientists from Ohio State University thawed cores from Tibet's glaciers, cousins of Antarctica's, and discovered dozens of previously unknown viral strains. Most were harmless, but their mere existence reminded us that the Earth stores more than fossils in its cold archives. What might emerge from beneath the southern ice, where time runs slower and preservation is perfect? What if the thaw releases not life, but memory? Biological echoes of a world that predated ours. Every image sent back from satellites, every scan from radar, feels like the peeling of a veil, but with each revelation comes unease. The ice once served as a boundary, a barrier between the known and the forbidden. Now that boundary is dissolving. And like all barriers that dissolve, it invites both wonder and fear. Some say the melting is natural, others insist it is not. Climate change, industrial heat, cosmic cycles, all may be true at once. Yet within that convergence, there is another possibility, that the planet itself is remembering. The warmth we measure is not punishment, but recollection. The return of a climate that once was, and may yet be again. If Antarctica was once green, and if the Earth turns as it always has, then perhaps the ice is only temporary. Beneath the meltwater, the old rivers are waking, tracing the same path they once followed under a gentler sun. As humanity worries over rising seas, perhaps we should ask a quieter question. What if the flood we fear is not destruction, but revelation? What if the sea is not reclaiming the world, but returning it? Because when the last wall of ice falls away, and the hidden valleys stand naked beneath the sky, the truth will no longer be speculation. We will see what has waited there, patient, silent, untouched, and the world will never be able to forget again. And when that happens, when the last mirror of ice breaks and reveals the face beneath, will we recognize what looks back at us? The men who first reached the end of the earth did not find the emptiness they expected. They found mirrors instead, reflections of their own endurance, their pride, and their fear. In the early 20th century, the race to conquer Antarctica was not just a contest of exploration, it was a pilgrimage into the unknown. Shackleton, Amundsen, Scott. Their names echo through frost and tragedy, their journals soaked with cold and awe. Yet behind the official histories, behind the photographs and medals, there are murmurs of something else, of things seen, recorded, and quietly erased. When Roald Amundsen planted the Norwegian flag at the South Pole in December 1911, he described the landscape as a vast white nothing, so complete that even imagination falls silent. He believed he was the first. But explorers who came later, wandering along the transantarctic ridges, found patterns in the ice, formations of stone that seemed arranged, though by what hand no one could say. They were photographed, logged, and forgotten. The data was filed away in archives where questions were not welcome. Ernest Shackleton's endurance expedition in 1914 is remembered for its heroism. The ship crushed by ice, the miraculous survival of his men. But there is another detail, buried in his lesser-known notes. On one reconnaissance trek across the Weddell Sea region, a crewman reported hearing a low vibration, rhythmic and unbroken, like the turning of a giant wheel. Shackleton dismissed it as wind trapped in the glaciers, but the sound persisted for hours, pulsing beneath their feet. Decades later, seismographs in the same region recorded a deep resonance from within the ice, identical in frequency. Then there was Admiral Richard Byrd. His first flight over the South Pole in 1929 made him a legend. Newspapers hailed him as a symbol of modern mastery over nature. But Byrd himself was unsettled. His notes speak of mountain ranges in their perfect symmetry, of valleys too smooth to be natural, and of a warm current of air rising where there should be none. When he returned for Operation High Jump in 1946, the expedition's scale was unprecedented. 13 ships, 33 aircraft, and more than 4,000 men, all for what was called a training exercise. It lasted barely 2 months before it was abruptly terminated. Officially, High Jump ended due to harsh weather and logistical problems. Unofficially, rumors began to swirl. Byrd's post-expedition interviews contain odd fragments. He spoke of a new enemy capable of flight from pole to pole, and of a great unknown land beyond the ice. His private diaries, if authentic, describe something stranger, a flight into a green valley beyond the mountains, where the air was warm and the snow turned to mist. Historians dismiss this as a hoax or delusion, yet even the myth carries weight. It suggests that Antarctica's silence hides not emptiness, but contradiction. The following decades deepen the mystery. During the Cold War, the continent became a stage for invisible exploration. Both the United States and the Soviet Union established secretive bases, publicly for science, privately for surveillance. Aerial reconnaissance missions flew patterns over the same regions repeatedly, as though searching for something specific. One declassified Soviet report from the 1960s mentions geophysical anomalies beneath the ice sheet of Queen Maud Land, sources of heat and magnetism inconsistent with geology. The details are sparse, but the phrasing is unmistakable. Inconsistent. The 1959 Antarctic Treaty froze all claims of sovereignty and forbade military activity. It was a triumph of diplomacy, but also a convenient curtain. Since then, only a handful of regions remain accessible without special clearance. The rest is restricted, locked under layers of bureaucracy and ice alike. Scientists who work there speak in careful tones, their research confined to climate, ice cores, and meteorology. Yet even in their data, anomalies appear. Unexplained heat fluxes, electromagnetic disturbances, and radar echoes suggesting hollows where no hollow should be. Some explorers who have ventured beyond permitted zones report sensations difficult to describe. Compass needles spinning, static in their radios, an oppressive silence broken by faint mechanical hums. Whether these are products of geology, machinery, or imagination, no one can say. But every expedition returns changed. One geologist, after months at McMurdo Station, wrote in his journal, "It feels as if the ice is watching, not with eyes, but with memory." We like to believe that exploration reveals, but in Antarctica, discovery often leads only to new forms of forgetting. The archives of early expeditions are full of missing pages, photographs mislabeled, coordinates left blank, data sheets mysteriously lost. What remains feels curated, as though the continent itself decides what may be remembered. Even today, the presence of military technology lingers under the guise of research. Satellites track thermal emissions in real time. Unmanned drones scan regions closed to human travel. Some of the images they capture, strange circular depressions, faintly geometric shadows, never reach public databases. Perhaps they are artifacts of processing, perhaps not. The polar night changes perception. Under months of darkness, the mind stretches thin. Explorers have written of seeing lights move beneath the ice, faint green and gold ripples that travel against the current. Scientists attribute them to bioluminescent algae or electromagnetic effects. But those who have seen them describe something else: movement with intention. One biologist wrote, It was like watching a thought pass through water. There are places on Earth where history feels heavy, where every step seems to awaken something that should remain asleep. Antarctica is the opposite. History feels absent, stripped away, leaving only presence, a silence so vast it consumes all noise, even thought. Perhaps that is why the explorers who went there became legends. They confronted not the unknown, but the absence of knowing. And yet in that emptiness, something watches back. Satellite readings reveal faint traces of atmospheric gravity waves above certain glaciers, pulses of air pressure that rise from below rather than above, like breath exhaled from the ground. The source remains unconfirmed. If we listen closely, the silence of Antarctica hums with everything we have tried to forget. The lost maps, the buried warmth, the stories erased for safety. The explorers who crossed its threshold may not have understood what they found, but their awe still lingers, frozen into ink, pressed into film, etched into memory. What did they truly see when they stared into that endless white? A void or a veil? A mirror or a window? Perhaps they did not discover Antarctica at all. Perhaps it discovered them. Stories of a drowned or frozen world echo across every ancient civilization, scattered like fragments of the same shattered mirror. The names differ: Atlantis, Mu, Lemuria, a sunken land of Cantre-Guelod. Yet beneath each myth is the same longing, the same unspoken grief for something lost. The Egyptians spoke of a sacred age they called Zep Tepi, the first time when the gods walked beside men before the world was remade by flood. The Sumerians wrote of kings who ruled for tens of thousands of years before the waters came. The Andeans told of Viracocha, the shining teacher from the south, who brought order after the great darkness. And in Polynesian legend, the ancestors sailed from a vanished homeland swallowed by waves. Different lands, different tongues, but the melody is the same. A memory of cataclysm and rebirth. It is as if humanity, scattered by disaster, carried fragments of a single story across the earth. The details warped with distance, but the refrain endured. Once there was a world of light, and it was taken by sea or ice. Modern anthropology treats such tales as metaphors, psychological reflections of seasonal floods, volcanic eruptions, or cultural trauma. Yet myth often preserves what memory cannot. When archaeologists uncovered the ruins of Troy, they realized that even legend can be geography in disguise. And so, we must ask, could the stories of sunken lands and frozen cities conceal not fantasy, but faint recollections of a prehistoric reality? The global flood myths number in the hundreds. In Mesopotamia's Epic of Gilgamesh, the gods send deluge to cleanse the world. In Genesis, the waters rise for 40 days and nights. The Aztecs remember a time when the seas consumed the mountains, leaving only a few souls clinging to cypress trees. The Hopi recall 4 previous worlds destroyed by fire, frost, and water. The Dogon of West Africa tell of a cosmic ship that brought life after the Great Inundation. Each narrative carries fragments of something older, perhaps not a single event, but a rhythm of destruction embedded in the planet's history. When the last ice age ended around 12,000 years ago, sea levels rose more than 100 meters, drowning coastlines across every continent. Entire regions that once teemed with life, the Sunda Shelf of Southeast Asia, Dogaland between Britain and Europe, the plains of the Persian Gulf, vanished beneath the sea. To those who lived there, it would have seemed as though the ocean had swallowed the world. If a civilization existed on those coasts, its disappearance would have become the seed of myth. The question is not whether there was a flood, but how much memory survived it. Plato's description of Atlantis fits eerily within that same window of time. His island, larger than Libya and Asia combined, was said to have fallen 9,000 years before Solon, roughly 11,600 BCE, at the very edge of the Younger Dryas, when the planet's climate shifted violently. Glaciers melted, oceans surged, and temperatures rose in a geological instant. To a people watching from the shore, it would have been the end of the world. Some researchers believe the Younger Dryas was triggered by a comet impact, the Younger Dryas boundary event, leaving microscopic traces of iridium and nanodiamonds across North America and Europe. Others think it was caused by massive freshwater outflows from collapsing ice sheets, disrupting ocean currents. Whatever the cause, the effect was the same. Civilizations, if any existed, would have been erased. Yet their stories, their grief, might have survived, carried in myth like embers in ash. In the temples of Egypt, priests spoke of a time when the Nile flowed differently, when the stars of Orion stood higher in the sky. In Bolivia's highlands, the stones of Tiwanaku show signs of water erosion far above any modern floodline. In the ruins of Dwarka, off India's western coast, divers have found remnants of city walls and roads submerged 20 meters below the sea. These discoveries do not prove Atlantis, but they whisper of forgotten chapters. The Earth's memory is imperfect but persistent. Even language preserves the echo. The root word for deluge in many tongues, diluvium, delu, dul, dalu, seems older than writing, older than myth itself. Perhaps it is the residue of a shared trauma, a cry that became a word. When early humans looked at the rising ocean, they saw not a natural process but a force of judgment, a cosmic reset. The flood cleansed the world, and the survivors began again. If we listen carefully, we can hear the same refrain in myths of fire and ice. The Norse Ragnarok describes a world consumed by flame, followed by a rebirth from the sea. The Maya spoke of eras destroyed by sun and storm. Even the Inuit legends of the far south, yes, south, speak of ancestors who came from lands of green that froze overnight. They remembered the warmth beneath the ice, the paradise entombed. Perhaps all these stories converge not on the single catastrophe, but on a recurring one. The earth breathes in cycles, creation, destruction, renewal. Civilizations rise, reach for the sky, and then vanish, leaving behind only symbols, stones, and stories. Myth becomes the fossil of memory. The great flood, the frozen kingdom, the lost empire. These are not competing tales but successive translations of the same event, written in different tongues of time. The idea may feel too vast to accept, yet when we look at the geological record we see confirmation of the same pattern. Abrupt shifts, mass extinctions, rapid climate changes. The planet's surface resets again and again. If the Earth is capable of forgetting its own forests and oceans, why should it remember our cities? And so the myths persist, not as fiction, but as warning. They remind us that the boundary between civilization and oblivion is thinner than ice, that the world we stand upon has drowned before and will again, that memory itself is fragile, and that only myth endures long enough to become truth. When the next thaw comes, as it surely will, the sea will rise, and the hidden lands will stir once more. Perhaps we will find ruins that rewrite history. Or perhaps we will become the next Atlantis, a rumor beneath future waves. If every culture remembers the same loss, was it ever truly forgotten? Or have we been remembering all along, only in different words? Perhaps the stories of flood and ice, not warnings of the past, but premonitions of the future, the echo of something that has already begun. The story of our species begins with a silence, a sudden leap from darkness into language, fire, and art. For nearly 200,000 years, humans lived as scattered tribes, their tools simple, their lives brief. Then, without warning, around 12,000 years ago, consciousness bloomed. We began to build, to measure the heavens, to remember. The change was so abrupt that archaeologists still call it the Great Leap Forward, as if humanity had been waiting for a signal. But what if that signal came not from the sky, but from the ice? There are genetic traces, faint, persistent, that point to an origin story stranger than we admit, in certain indigenous populations of South America and Australasia. Scientists have found fragments of DNA that do not fit the accepted pattern of migration. They do not match East Asian or Siberian lineages, nor do they belong to any known ancient group. They appear suddenly, as though from a vanished source. Researchers call them ghost populations. But ghosts, by definition, once lived. Some suggest that these genetic anomalies could be the legacy of an early migration from a southern homeland, long before the world's known civilizations. Others imagine something older still, survivors from a lost world who scattered after catastrophe, carrying with them memory and skill. If a people had once thrived on a now frozen continent, where would their descendants go when the ice came? South America lies directly north of Antarctica. Its Andean highlands mirror the shape of the southern mountains. It is not unthinkable that refugees of a dying land would have followed the winds north, settling along coasts that still held warmth. The oldest sites in the Americas support this suspicion. At Monteverde in Chile, stone tools and remnants of huts date back at least 14,500 years, centuries earlier than the first North American settlements. Some of the artifacts show familiarity with ocean resources, as if their makers had long known the sea. In Brazil, at Pedra Ferrada, evidence hints at human presence over 20,000 years old, far older than traditional migration models allow. And in Patagonia, skeletal remains show features unlike those of Asian ancestry. They belong to no clear lineage. Perhaps they were the descendants of those who fled when the South began to freeze. The same mystery appears in language. The Amana people of Tierra del Fuego once spoke a tongue filled with words for water, ice, and reflection. A language built for describing a landscape of melting and freezing. Their myths speak of ancestors who followed the sun from a land of eternal light, forced north by the cold. The echoes are faint, yet hauntingly familiar. If such survivors existed, what knowledge did they carry? The sudden rise of agriculture, astronomy, and megalithic architecture across the world after 10,000 BCE feels less like invention and more like remembrance. At Göbekli Tepe in Turkey, the earliest known stone sanctuary, monoliths carved with animals and constellations appear millennia before writing. The site emerged fully formed, as if built by those who already knew geometry and the sky. In Peru's Corral, pyramids and observatories rose nearly as early as the Egyptian Old Kingdom. Across oceans, cultures began to shape stone with uncanny precision, aligning their monuments to the solstices and the stars. These were not isolated sparks of genius, they were scattered embers of the same fire. The idea of a forgotten teacher race, not gods but survivors, is as old as civilization itself. The Sumerians spoke of the Apkarlu, sages who emerged from the sea after the flood to teach humanity writing and law. The Egyptians told of Thoth, who brought the wisdom of the before time. The Greeks had Prometheus, who gave men knowledge stolen from heaven. And in the Andes, the legend of viriculture returns, a bearded stranger in white, emerging from Lake Titicaca, bearing the secrets of building and astronomy. Different names, same archetype, the memory of those who remembered. Modern science, wary of myth, calls these coincidences of pattern. But patterns have a way of surviving reason. Perhaps the myths are not about gods descending, but people returning, bearers of a civilization that had once mapped the stars before being swallowed by the cold. Their knowledge would have seemed divine to the hunters who inherited the empty world. Over generations, the survivors' science would blur into legend, their tools into relics, their memory into prayer. Genetic evidence may yet hold the truth. In 2018, researchers studying the genome of ancient Andean mummies found traces linking them not to Asia, as expected, but to populations in the South Pacific. How could such a connection exist unless ancient seafarers had crossed the ocean thousands of years before Polynesia was even settled? Some speculate that these were remnants of an older pre-Ice Age network, a maritime civilization that vanished when the seas rose. If their homeland had once been the southern continent, the exodus would have scattered their blood across both hemispheres. The human genome, like the ice, remembers. Within every cell lies the record of survival, migrations, bottlenecks, rebirths. We study our DNA as though it were code, but it is closer to a map, tracing paths across forgotten oceans. Each mutation is a waypoint, each shared sequence a bridge between worlds we've lost. If those bridges lead back to Antarctica, we may be forced to accept that history is not a straight line but a spiral, each turn carrying fragments of the lost. What, then, becomes of our identity if we're all descendants of the lost? Perhaps civilization did not begin once but many times, each awakening buried by ice or water, each rediscovered as if for the first time. The continuity of symbols, the spiral, the serpent, the circle of the sun, appears in every culture because they are not inventions. They are memories of an older lexicon carved into the deep consciousness of our species. The genetic drift between continents, the myths of shining teachers, the sudden rise of knowledge. Together they form a quiet pattern, one that points not upward to heaven, but downward, beneath the ice. Maybe Atlantis was not a city of marble and gold, but a cradle of humanity's first renaissance. A civilization erased but not forgotten, lingering in our blood, our languages, our dreams. And as we gaze south, toward that silent white horizon, we are looking not at the end of the earth, but at our own beginning. Did the survivors of that frozen world teach the newborn earth how to begin again? Or are we merely repeating what they already knew, destined to forget once more when the next ice comes? Every civilization is built not only on stone, but on silence. Beneath the stories we tell lies a layer of omission, a choice, conscious or not to forget. The more we build, the more we conceal. History, after all, is not a collection of facts. It is a selection of permissions. And somewhere between what we are allowed to know and what we are meant to forget lies the shadow of the church and the compass, the forces that for centuries defined the edges of the world. When the Age of Discovery began, Europe's explorers sailed into oceans that maps called empty. But they were not empty. They were white spaces, the same blankness that once surrounded the southern continent. Here be dragons, the cartographers wrote, because what cannot be named must be feared. Yet behind the bravado of conquest hid another agenda, to redraw the memory of the world. The Vatican's influence stretched across these voyages, not only blessing ships but dictating what their captains could reveal. The Church had long maintained an uneasy truce with geography. It needed the world to be round enough for heaven, but not so round that new Edens could appear. After all, if other continents existed, what did that mean for salvation? Were their souls beyond Christ's reach? When Columbus returned with rumors of another world, theologians debated whether the people he found were descendants of Noah or of some pre-Adamic race. The discovery of new lands was not just scientific, it was heretical, and so information was filtered, rewritten, or suppressed. Among the most guarded secrets were maps, those dangerous documents that could challenge doctrine by simple geometry. The Peri-Race map, already ancient in lineage, was quietly dismissed. Mercator's southern continent was folded into allegory. Even as explorers skirted the edges of the Antarctic Circle, official records spoke only of storms and seaweed. The truth was buried beneath layers of ecclesiastical caution. A blank space is safer than a contradiction. In the 16th century, when scholars began translating forbidden manuscripts from the East, whispers emerged of older maps, stored within the Vatican Library, charts of the world drawn long before Christ, showing coastlines and lands unseen by medieval eyes. Access to the archives was, and still is, restricted. Even now, fewer than a dozen living scholars hold permission to enter without escort. Inside, beneath frescoes of apostles, lies a labyrinth of more than 80 kilometers of shelves, manuscripts, codices, and maps locked away from public view. What do they contain? No one truly knows. Some who have entered speak of ancient atlases from Alexandria, copied by monks after the Great Fire. Others mention documents labeled in Greek and Arabic, describing the southern continent as fertile and inhabited. The official line insists that these are fables, but the secrecy surrounding them only deepens the suspicion that they preserve a geography older than Scripture, a memory too inconvenient to canonize. The Jesuit order, known for its intellect, played a silent role in shaping what we believe about the world. Their scholars advised monarchs, charted the heavens, and educated the elite. Many of the earliest polar measurements came from Jesuit observatories, yet their data was often censored before publication. Even Galileo's telescope had to bow to theology. If the Church could rewrite the cosmos, why not the map? By the 17th century, when Mercator's successors began revising his projections, the mysterious Terra Australis, the vast southern continent, quietly disappeared from Western charts. The reason, officially, was lack of evidence. But perhaps it was something else, the need for erasure. If older maps had shown a habitable Antarctica, it could not coexist with a doctrine that placed Eden in the Middle East. A frozen paradise south of the world would shatter the symmetry of divine history. Centuries later, during the Enlightenment, explorers began rediscovering what the ancients already seemed to know. Cook, Ross, and Weddell sailed through waters described in medieval maps, confirming islands and coastlines dismissed as myth. Yet even then, much of that data was sealed under imperial classification. When Cook returned in 1775, his logs describing mild air and greenish waters near the Antarctic Peninsula were redacted. The Church no longer ruled the seas, but its ghost still lingered in every royal archive. We think of censorship as crude, burning books, silencing voices, but its most powerful form is omission. The Vatican did not need to destroy the maps of the Old World. It only needed to file them away where no one would look. And so, the greatest collection of pre-modern cartography remains under lock and key, guarded by men who claim to protect truth by keeping it hidden. In 2013, a rare document surfaced from a private estate in Portugal, a 1519 world map once owned by a Jesuit navigator. It depicted a southern coastline matching the shape of modern Antarctica, centuries before its discovery. Scholars authenticated the parchment, but dismissed it as speculative geography. That phrase, speculative geography, has long been the velvet glove of suppression. It allows the powerful to keep the impossible contained within the plate boundaries of curiosity. The compass, too, became a weapon of silence. With it, explorers could navigate anywhere, but only within the world they were told existed. To sail beyond the sanctioned edges of the map was to invite exile, excommunication, or disappearance. Many did. Few returned. Those who did spoke of lands that could not be published, coasts erased from official charts, and orders to destroy their notes for the peace of the faithful. It is tempting to view these stories as conspiracy, but history itself is a conspiracy of forgetting. Every archive hides another beneath it. Every truth is layered with dust. The Church was not alone in its concealment. Empires, too, lend the art of erasure. Knowledge, once deemed dangerous, is never lost. It is buried in centuries of paper and ice. If ancient maps lie in Vatican vaults, their purpose may never have been deceit. Perhaps they are held in reverence, reminders of a truth humanity is not yet ready to face, that civilizations rise and fall like tides, that our world has been drawn and redrawn countless times, that God or nature does not fear revision. Today we chase those missing lines with satellites and sensors, but what we seek is not new. It is the same shape our ancestors traced, the same silence our institutions preserved. We live in a world still ruled by those invisible compasses, guiding us towards sanctioned truths and away from forbidden directions. And as the ice continues to melt, one wonders, when the southern land finally reveals what lies beneath, will the Church open its archives, or will it close them tighter? Because if the maps beneath the Vatican do show a green Antarctica, then history, faith, and science will all have to admit the same impossible thing, that the world we know is not the first. Beneath the Antarctic sky, night and day blur into one long twilight. The sun circles but never sets, a dim halo wandering round the horizon like an indifferent god. Yet amid that endless light, there are places where the human eye is not allowed to look, bases that do not appear on official maps, stations unmarked by flag or name. The world believes Antarctica belongs to science, but the machines buried beneath its snow hum with another purpose. The modern age has turned exploration into surveillance. Satellites orbit the pole, mapping every ridge, every flicker of temperature. Yet some readings defy explanation: patches of heat under the ice, geometric voids where solid ground should be. When the European Space Agency released gravitational data in 2018, geophysicists noticed something unsettling: a massive anomaly under the Wilkes Land region, nearly 500 kilometers across, dense enough to distort the planet's gravitational field. It could be an asteroid impact basin, they said, or perhaps something else, a structure of unimaginable scale, buried before the first human memory. At the same time, rumors began to circulate among contractors stationed at research facilities. Pilots spoke of restricted air corridors, zones where instruments failed and magnetic readings twisted. Some told of aircraft rerouted without explanation, of blacked-out coordinates and flight logs. The official reason was always safety, but safety, in the language of secrecy, often means silence. The U.S., base at McMurdo, officially a logistics hub, houses equipment that few outsiders understand: antenna arrays, signal receivers, and what one engineer called cryogenic computing units. South of it, near Dome C, sits Concordia Station, run jointly by France and Italy. Officially, it monitors climate change. Unofficially, it hosts data centers connected to deep space communications networks. The cables, laid through tunnels under the ice, are said to link directly to satellites orbiting far beyond Earth's atmosphere. Why would the coldest place on Earth host a gateway to the sky? Some whisper of neutrino detectors, vast subterranean arrays that listen to the universe. The Ice Cube Neutrino Observatory, buried at the South Pole, uses thousands of sensors frozen deep within the glacier to capture particles from distant galaxies. It is one of the most advanced scientific instruments ever built. Yet some of its readings, briefly mentioned in early publications, hinted at neutrinos arriving not from above but from below, as if something inside the Earth were emitting them. Those references quietly vanished in later reports. If the ice hides more than geology, the technology above it may already know. In 2016, a satellite known as GRACE detected fluctuations in Antarctica's gravity field that coincided with seismic signals, pulses, rhythmic and faint, repeating every 11 days. The pattern did not match natural tectonics. A few researchers compared it to mechanical resonance, a vibration produced by a buried structure under stress. The data was never publicly explained. The fascination with Antarctica among the world's powers has only deepened. Nations that rarely agree on anything, the United States, Russia, China, all maintain heavy infrastructure there. Drones patrol its skies, icebreakers linger near invisible borders, and satellites circle like silent sentinels. Official statements speak of cooperation and research, but the overlapping territories tell another story, each nation guarding a portion of the unknown. There are stories, too, of machines found in the ice, relics perhaps, or accidents of geology misread by wishful eyes. In 2003, a group of searchers drilling near Lake Vostok claimed to have hit a metallic object 3,600 meters below the surface. The borehole flooded and froze before they could continue. The samples taken afterward showed traces of titanium and nickel, alloys uncommon in the surrounding rock. The report was published, then swiftly retracted as measurement error. Those who worked on the project were reassigned, their names omitted from later acknowledgments. Still, whispers persist. Photographs circulate on obscure websites. Grainy images of dark shapes protruding from the ice, circular depressions miles wide, entrances shaped too neatly to be natural. Most are easily dismissed as pareidolia or manipulation. But one thing remains constant: the feeling that something mechanical sleeps beneath the snow. If ancient civilizations once existed there, could we now be standing on their ruins without realizing it? And if the governments of the world know, why keep it secret? The answer may be simple, or terrifying. Knowledge of a pre-human technology would fracture every foundation of belief, religion, and power. The existence of an intelligence older than ours, capable of surviving the shifting poles, would redefine history itself. Better, perhaps, to leave it under ice. The machines we build now, the antennas, the sensors, the deep ice observatories, may not be searching outward at all. They may be listening downward. The signals they monitor, the pulses they chart, could be echoes from whatever sleeps below. The official data shows occasional noise events, bursts of low-frequency sound reverberating through the ice, sometimes lasting hours, too structured to be tectonic, too regular to be coincidence. Some resemble coded sequences, binary-like rhythms repeating at intervals. But no one outside the classified channels has ever seen the raw data. In 2018, a satellite detected a sudden heat bloom beneath the Thwaites Glacier, far larger than geothermal processes could explain. It was dismissed as volcanic activity, yet infrared images revealed a circular pattern, radiating outward. For weeks, the anomaly persisted, then faded without trace. No follow-up expedition was allowed. To this day, the coordinates remain under restricted access, and still, the machines continue to hum. Scientists on the ice speak of nights when their instruments record signals no one ordered, transmissions looping from nowhere, data packets filled with static. Once, a technician left an audio monitor running overnight and captured a low oscillating sound, pulsing like a heartbeat. He joked it was the ice dreaming. He deleted the file the next day. Perhaps the machines are not intrusions but continuations. Perhaps we are unknowingly rebuilding what once existed, repeating an ancient cycle of discovery and concealment. The sensors, the antennas, the satellites, all listening to a signal older than humanity waiting for its reply. If we awaken what sleeps beneath, will it recognize us as its descendants or its replacements? And when the first true signal rises from the depths, will we call it discovery or return? The ice is not merely frozen water, it is memory made visible. Every snowflake that falls on Antarctica becomes a page in the planet's diary, pressed down by centuries until it hardens into crystal. Layer by layer, it records everything: the breath of ancient forests, the smoke of forgotten fires, the chemistry of vanished seas. Scientists call it stratigraphy. Poets might call it remembrance. Each depth is a different world, each bubble of air a whisper from an age when the sky was another color. When the first deep cores were extracted from the polar plateau, they were not just samples, they were revelations. At 10 meters, the air was medieval. At 100, Bronze Age. At 1,000, prehistory. At 3,000 meters, nearly 4 kilometers of compression. The air that emerged from the melting core was 800,000 years old. To hold it was to breathe the ghost of a world before humanity. In those bubbles were traces of volcanic ash, methane, and pollen. Proof that Antarctica was once alive. But what if those layers also contained something less measurable? Not the residue of climate, but the residue of civilization. Ice, after all, preserves not only nature's signatures but human ones. Soot, metal, radiation, even sound. The densest layers act as a kind of crystal memory, capturing vibrations as subtle as heartbeats. When researchers amplified recordings of seismic waves from certain Antarctic cores, they found faint, rhythmic patterns, pulsing at intervals that did not match tectonic activity. Some dismissed it as instrumentation error. Others, more quietly, wondered if the ice itself might be resonating with something older than Earth current pulse. Perhaps the ice remembers more than it should. In its deepest layers, the pressure transforms it into blue crystal, dense, luminous, nearly translucent. Under certain conditions, when drilled, it rings. The sound is eerie, harmonic, like the chime of glass underwater. Geologists say it is the release of trapped stress. But standing above a borehole, hearing the earth sing, one cannot help but imagine the frozen memory of oceans and forests humming beneath our feet. Every civilization has searched for a way to defeat forgetting. The ancients carved in stone, the monks wrote in vellum. We encode in silicon, but the planet itself writes in ice. Each epoch leaves its fingerprint not in monuments but in the chemical balance of the air. Within that logic, even an erased civilization would remain, not as ruins but as ratios. Sudden spikes of carbon dioxide, odd traces of isotopes, metallic dust. If one looked carefully enough at the layers beneath the ice, perhaps one could read not just climate but consciousness. The evidence of fire that did not come from volcanoes, or smoke that came from burning cities rather than forests. There have been anomalies. In one 1999 study, researchers analyzing a core from Dome Fuji found a thin band of elevated nickel and platinum, elements associated with meteor impacts, but also with industrial smelting. The layer's age was ambiguous, roughly 13,000 years old, overlapping the Younger Dryas boundary. The official explanation was a comet. The unofficial one was never printed. A comet leaves glassy debris. This layer left magnetic ash. We might never know what the ice remembers, because the deeper we drill, the more the data threatens to rewrite the story of time. In some layers, isotopic ratios fluctuate wildly, suggesting temperature swings that should have taken millennia are occurring in mid-decades. Such shifts imply cataclysm or intervention. Could an ancient event, natural or human, have disrupted the atmosphere so violently that even the ice still shudders with its echo? To think of ice as a recording medium is to understand that nothing is truly lost. The sounds of past ages, wind, thunder, and perhaps the murmur of forgotten speech might still be encoded in microscopic structures, waiting to be decoded by technology not yet invented. In this sense, Antarctica is not a wasteland but an archive, the largest and oldest on the planet. And like any archive, it resists being opened. When light passes through ancient ice, it bends, splitting into pale spectrums that shimmer like trapped dawns. Some physicists studying the optical properties of glacier cores report seeing faint, shadow-like distortions within the ice, brief silhouettes that vanish when approached. They attribute them to refraction. Yet, in their notebooks, one finds words not typical of science: haunting, presence, memory. Perhaps it is the human mind reflecting itself against eternity, but perhaps the ice is not entirely inert. Imagine time itself layered in crystal, the past not gone but merely compacted. To disturb it is to unroll eternity in reverse. Every drilling expedition, every extraction of a core is a form of resurrection, waking the atmosphere of forgotten worlds. What if, somewhere deep within those cores, lies not the mark of nature but of intention? What if the ice holds a message, encoded in chemistry, left by a civilization that knew it would be buried? In myth, the idea is not new. The Nordic sagas speak of Ymir, the giant of ice whose body contained all creation. When he was slain, the world was formed from his frozen remains. The Egyptians believed memory could be preserved in crystal. The Tibetans wrote of luminous stones that sang when touched. Across cultures, the metaphor of frozen knowledge persists, that the truth, once buried, becomes clear only when thawed. Modern science treats such images as poetry, but even poetry can prefigure discovery. When the first radio signals were sent through glacial ice, researchers found that its density allowed frequencies to travel with almost no loss, as though the ice were designed to preserve vibration. Perhaps that is not coincidence. Perhaps it is function. Perhaps the planet itself is a kind of consciousness, preserving its experiences in crystalline archives, waiting for its next awakening. The more the ice melts, the more this memory seeps into the oceans. Each drop of meltwater carries trace gases, isotopes, and minerals from eons past, fragments of Earth's autobiography dissolving back into circulation. The sea absorbs them, the air tastes them, and we breathe them again. In a sense, we're already inhaling our planet's memory. When the ice becomes water, the archive becomes the world once more. The old air returns to the sky, the ancient dust to the soil, the forgotten warmth to the sea. The cycle completes itself, and perhaps, within that cycle, is the quiet logic of rebirth. Maybe history is not written in stone after all. Maybe it is frozen transparency, a clarity so perfect that we mistake it for emptiness. And when it melts, when that clarity flows back into our hands, we will finally see what we have always been a part of. Because the ice does not forget. It only waits for us to remember. There is a kind of stillness that lives only at the end of the world. It is not silence in the absence of sound, but silence as presence, a vast breathing pause where time itself seems to wait. That stillness hangs over Antarctica like a veil. Even in the modern age, with our machines and satellites and restless hunger for discovery, the ice remains undefeated. It watches as we orbit it with curiosity and fear, and it gives nothing away, at least not yet. But the world is changing again. The great glaciers are retreating, seas are rising, and the old equilibrium is dissolving. The stillness before the thaw is deceptive. To the eye, nothing moves. To the instruments, everything does. The continent that once swallowed empires and myths now begins to uncover itself, shedding its shroud inch by inch. What lies beneath will not only rewrite history, it will test our humility. We are taught to believe that the future is a straight line, a march of progress leading us from ignorance to knowledge. But Antarctica reminds us that time is circular, that civilizations rise, vanish, and rise again like the tides. What we call discovery may simply be remembrance. Every new expedition, every new theory, feels less like invention and more like déjà vu, the faint recognition of something we once knew, long ago before the cold came. Perhaps that is why the human heart is drawn to lost continents and forbidden maps. It is not greed for treasure or fame, but the instinct of memory. Somewhere deep within, we sense that our story began in a place now hidden under miles of ice. The philosophers called it Atlantis, the poets called it Eden. But names are only markers for longing. Beneath them all is the same ache, the desire to return to the first warmth. As the ice melts, we stand on the threshold of revelation. Satellite imagery already reveals the black veins of rock beneath the white surface, the buried mountains, the rivers of meltwater gliding through unseen valleys. It is as though the continent is exhaling after eons of restraint. Yet with each revelation comes unease. What if the truth beneath the ice is not a beginning, but a warning? The Earth remembers its cycles even if we do not. Every 10 or 15,000 years it shifts. Poles wander, temperatures swing, oceans rise and fall. We live inside one of those breaths now, the warm exhalation that follows long cold. For us it feels like crisis. For the planet it is only renewal. But renewal is not gentle. It scrapes away the old to make room for the next. If the ice conceals the remnants of an earlier humanity, if the pyramids, the megaliths, the strange maps all point back to that vanished age, then perhaps their greatest message is not about technology, but humility. To know that others once walked this same earth, mastered it, and then were erased. is to realize how brief our dominion truly is. The arrogance of progress dissolves in the face of such repetition. Even now, beneath the glaciers, our own traces sink into new layers. The metal of our ships, the dust of our cities, the carbon of our engines, all will become part of the next fossil record. Future beings, if any survive, will study them as we study mammoth bones and wonder who we were, what we believed, and why we thought ourselves eternal. Perhaps they will find our ruins beside the ruins of those who came before, entombed in the same ice, the same forgetting. In this light, the myth of Atlantis becomes not tragedy, but prophecy. It tells us that every age believes itself unassailable until the ocean rises to reclaim it. Whether that ocean is of water or of time makes no difference. The flood is always coming, and beneath each deluge something of us remains, a trace, a shape, a vibration locked in the planet's memory. Scientists often speak of tipping points, thresholds beyond which systems cannot return. But the Earth has crossed and recrossed those thresholds countless times. Ice becomes water, water becomes vapor, vapor becomes sky. And the cycle begins again. The difference now is that we are here to witness it, perhaps to understand it, perhaps to remember better than those before us. If the ice truly hides an older world, its re-emergence will not be an unveiling but a mirror. We'll see in it the reflection of our own impermanence, our own ambition, our own forgetting. And when the last veil of snow dissolves, the image looking back will not be alien. It will be us, changed by time, humbled by silence, resurrected by memory. The melting of Antarctica is not only a geological event, it is a revelation written in slow motion. Every drop of water sliding into the sea is a syllable of the planet's confession. It speaks of past mistakes, of cycles unbroken, of warmth that always follows cold. It reminds us that the Earth's language is not written in words but in temperature, pressure, and rhythm. And yet, despite all our knowledge, we still treat the ice as an object, not a teacher. We measure it, model it, drill into it, but rarely do we listen. What if the ice has been trying to tell us something all along? What if its slow melt is not only a symptom of change, but a form of speech? Perhaps the planet speaks in tides, and the Thor is its whisper. Remember. When the final sheets collapse and the black rock of the buried land stands exposed to the air, we will face the same choice that every civilization before us has faced: to listen or to repeat, to see ourselves as custodians of memory or to drown in it once again. The answer will decide whether we become the next legend beneath the ice, another cautionary tale told by future tongues about a species that once thought itself immortal. For now, the stillness holds. The cold wind moves across the plains like the slow breathing of a sleeper. The machinery of nations hums at the edges, waiting for access, waiting for revelation. But the ice does not hurry. It melts at its own pace, aware that all truth arrives in silence. When the Thor completes, whether decades or centuries from now, there will be a moment, brief and blinding, when the sun touches stone unseen for 1,000,000 years. And in that light, the world will remember what it forgot. The question is not what lies beneath the ice, but whether we are ready to see ourselves when the reflection appears.